Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Outdoor Adventures here on Brownfield. I'm Brent Barnett, and on this week's program we're talking about deer season coming up soon this fall. It's kind of crazy to already be thinking about the fact that archery season's right around the corner, especially in Missouri, where they have that September 15th opener. And joining us here on the show this week is Jason Isabelle with the Missouri Department of Conservation. Jason, thanks for being back with us here on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Brent. Happy to be back with you. And yeah, deer season's right around the corner here in Missouri.
It really is. That September 15th opener sneaks up on you really fast.
It does, yeah. And depending on the year, September 15th can feel pretty comfortable. It can still feel like early to mid-August. So we'll have to see what this year brings.
Definitely some opportunities there in the early season, Jason. You know, you might still catch some of those deer that are on their summer, coming off the end of their summer feeding patterns. Do you like to hunt that time of year?
I would love to if I had more time. I do hunt a lot. Most of it happens to fall later in the season. But I think a lot of people underestimate like how good early season can be for targeting a mature buck. And I think that's one of the advantages of the archery season that we have here opening in mid-September is you're very right. The bucks at that point in time still are fairly visible, particularly if you're hunting in the afternoon and you've got a good food source. There's a lot of guys that shoot really nice deer between the 15th of September and the 1st of October here. And of course it can be warm, like I mentioned. So depending on the conditions, but I also think a lot of the times the conditions affect the hunters more than the deer. And so you have hunters that won't go when it's warm, but in a lot of cases, even those mature bucks are still on their feet in daylight hitting a food source, even if it's really warm in late September. So for the folks that can put in the time and have done the scouting, yeah, the rut's obviously a great time to shoot a buck. Late season can be great too, but that early season in Missouri, the first 2 weeks can be really dynamite.
I think it's always good to mention, don't overlook those days where the conditions are unpleasant. Like you said, you know, some hunters might not go out because maybe it's too hot, but that kind of opens the door for less pressure, especially if you hunt public land, Jason. That just might be the day you go in there and get that big buck.
Yeah, and I think it seems like a lot in the early season that the hotter temperatures just don't bother them as much. Like if you're in the seems like you get into late October, first couple weeks of November, you know, where you're getting in the rut and you have a really warm day. Of course, that time of year, it's usually cooler. So you get a really warm day and things just kind of get slow. But at the end of September, the deer are used to those temperatures. They've been dealing with them all summer. They've still been coming out. You know, you look at a bean field in the heat of the summertime in the evening, it's still lots of deer out there. So they're used to it that time of year. And so it can be uncomfortable to be out there when you're swatting mosquitoes and it's hot and you're sweating. But yeah, it oftentimes will affect the hunters way more than it'll affect the deer, particularly in that early season.
Does your agency monitor the population trends in the state, and how are things looking for the state's whitetail herd?
Yeah, we do, and we monitor in each of our 114 counties every year, and numbers are good right now. They're in the vast majority of our counties, they're at desired levels. We have a few counties where we're over objective and a few where we're below objective, but in most of the counties of the state, we're right about in that sweet spot of where we want to be. And a couple of the ways that we assess where we are in relation to what our Missouri citizens think is an appropriate number of deer is we'll survey our hunters every year, then we'll survey agricultural producers every year. And we ask the same question on both surveys. So we ask our hunters in the county that you hunt most, do you think that there are too few deer, about the right number of deer, or too many? And then we ask the ag producers the same exact question in the county where their farm's located. And so by looking at what percentage of hunters feel like deer numbers are about right and what percent of producers feel like they're about right, we can hopefully arrive at that middle ground where there's enough deer out there where the hunters are satisfied, but there's not so many that the farmers are having a lot of damage to their beans and corn and other crops too. And so based on the information that we collect from the producers and from the hunters, it seems like in the most parts of the state and most counties, we're right about that level where we want to be at.
What's the health of the state's deer herd been like in recent years, Jason? Mostly talking about any sort of illness or diseases. Here in Iowa, I know in the last couple of years, there were some cases of EHD, and you and I have talked in the past here on the show about chronic wasting disease efforts. Might just explain to the listeners how you all manage that and some of the steps that you take.
Yeah, so you mentioned a couple different diseases. In terms of hemorrhagic disease, that's a viral disease that is not 100% fatal to deer. It does kill a lot of deer, but some can survive the virus. It tends to pop up early fall, late summer, even into midsummer. And it's one of those diseases that's out there in the population. Some years are really severe, most are not. We'll get a scattered number of reports just about every year. And then occasionally you'll have a year like the really bad drought in 2012 where we get a real bad outbreak. But so it's not a disease that we're worried about in terms of the long-term health of our herd. If we have a significant outbreak of hemorrhagic disease within the few years after that, the deer herd bounces right back. So it can cause some localized declines in numbers, but the populations bounce back pretty quick. We really haven't had a severe outbreak of hemorrhagic disease since 2012. We've had some years where we've had some more localized outbreaks, but nothing at a broad scale like we did in 2012. And then really the last couple of years have been pretty quiet. So we really haven't had, what I would consider any severe outbreaks of any significance anywhere in the state. In terms of CWD, of course, an entirely different disease that is certainly a very serious threat to the long-term health of our deer population. We do have the disease scattered throughout a good number of our counties. We're up to 46 of our 114 counties where we've had at least one detection, and it's kind of scattered all the way from close to the Iowa border down to the Arkansas border. So it's a pretty patchy distribution, but thankfully we've been managing the disease pretty aggressively, and the percentage of deer that actually have CWD, even in the areas where we've had it the longest, is still really low. So we think about like Lynn and Macon counties in north central Missouri, which is where we first detected the disease. Of all the samples we tested in those two counties last year, less than 2% tested positive. So it's at really low levels. And I think part of that is because we have managed the disease, and that's certainly helping to keep the prevalence low. But there are, as you look around the country, there's a lot of other states that are having, unfortunately, a lot higher prevalence rates, and are starting to see the impacts of the disease on the deer population. But thankfully in Missouri, our deer herd is really healthy, and the infection rates or the prevalence rates of the disease is very low at this point in time.
When the state looks to manage CWD and keep those numbers low, like you mentioned, can you maybe provide us some examples what those management strategies look like?
Yeah. So the way we think about CWD management in Missouri is like two scales, broad scale and localized. And so if you think about a broad scale, either at the county level or statewide, those would be things like our carcass disposal regulations, which require if a hunter shoots a deer, any unused parts either have to be deposited in the trash that ends up in a landfill or left on the property where the deer was shot. So it prevents somebody from shooting a deer in an area that has a disease and driving it across the state and dumping the carcass in the back 40, which can spread the disease. So that would be one of the things that I would call a broad scale management tool. At the localized level, really the most effective strategy is targeted removal. And what that involves is going into within about a mile or two of where we've had detections, and then working with landowners on a voluntary basis for the 2-month period after deer season ends to remove some additional deer. And what that does is helps to remove additional positives off the landscape, so they're not out there interacting with deer, spreading it to other deer, leaving the infectious agent on the landscape for other deer to encounter. And it also helps to some degree to localize, to reduce the density in those localized areas so the disease doesn't spread as quickly. We've been doing that since we first detected the disease. It's really effective. It's highly localized compared to the number of deer that get removed by hunters every year. It pales in comparison. And so it's a really strategic, localized level of removal. And so far we've had really good success with it, keeping the number of infected deer in those areas really low. And we also offer landowners some additional permits if they hunt in some of those localized areas within a mile or two of positives as well, just to give them some additional opportunity to harvest deer if they want to.
We're talking with Jason Isabelle this week from the Missouri Department of Conservation. Jason, with hunting seasons coming up very fast, might be a good idea to here for us to update the listeners of any regulation changes that we'll see this year for the deer seasons.
Yeah, so one of the big ones was the one I just mentioned about the carcass disposal regs. So those are new this year. Previously, we had restrictions on what parts of deer hunters could move in various parts of the state. And so we removed those this year. And so this year, if a hunter shoots a deer, they can still take it to a processor, to a taxidermist, of course. But if they're going to process it themselves, they'll have to dispose of those unused parts in a trash that goes to a landfill or leave them on the property where they shot the deer. And so that's designed to minimize the spread of CWD, and they'll have to telecheck their deer before they take the deer across county lines as well. So that'll be a new adjustment for hunters this year. But I think the desire there is to minimize the spread of CWD, and that regulation is also much simpler to understand. When there was unfortunately a bit of confusion with the old regs, and so I think the new ones are easier to understand. And hopefully they'll give hunters more flexibility to move deer throughout the state and ultimately help us to slow the spread of CWD. So that's a new change. We also made a change to the bag limit for our early youth portion of firearms deer season. So previously, youth hunter could only shoot one deer during that 2-day period. This year, we've made that bag limit change to align it with the rest of our firearms portion. So those youth hunters aren't going to be restricted to just one deer during that portion anymore. In Missouri, all hunters can only shoot one antler deer with a firearm throughout the entire firearms deer season, so that did not change. But for those hunters during the early youth portion, it just standardizes the bag limit across all of our firearms portions, which is much simpler for folks to understand, and I think a good move in terms of simplicity. So, yeah, in terms of other changes this year, we added some more counties to the management zone, CWD management zone, and so that triggers a few changes in those counties. Folks are no longer able to put out feed or mineral. They have an extra firearms portion of deer season, and the antler point restriction, if it was in effect in those counties, goes away. So there's definitely some counties this year where folks need to be aware of that entered the zone, and so that'll change some of the hunting regulations for them this fall as well.
That youth season, that was when I got my first deer as a youngster. I don't remember if it was like a little 7 or an 8 point back then. That was several years ago now, but that's always a fun time. Take the kids out and give them a chance to get their first deer. It's really great.
Yeah, especially the time of the year for that one. It's really good. It's, the way it falls here in Missouri, it's late October, early November. So it's not the bitterly cold of December and January. So the weather is usually cool but comfortable. And as you very well know, late October, early November, there's a lot of deer movement in the woods. It's an exciting time of the year. Get to hear grunting and see chasing. And like for a youth hunter, those 2 days are so great. I mean, I just love to see the pictures of the kids with the deer that they harvest on that weekend and any other time during the season. But yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to get our youngsters hooked on deer hunting for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So we mentioned, Jason, September 15th is the opener for archery season. What are some of the other season dates for deer that will be coming up this fall?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of different portions of deer season. So we've got a long archery season that runs from September 15 all the way to January 15. It is closed during the primary firearm season in November, but other than that, it's open throughout that entire period. So a lot of opportunity for archers. We do have 2 different youth portions. So one is that early youth portion that we talked about in late October, early November. And late October, early November, the late youth portion is obviously later, hence the name late. It's later. It's in late November. That's a 3-day period. So 2 youth portions. We also have 2 different antlerless firearms portions. So we have one in early to mid-October. This year it happens to be the 10th through the 12th of October, and that's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday in not statewide, but in most counties of the state. So we've got that early antlerless firearms portion and then a late portion in December. And we also have what most hunters, where they spend their time the most, that November portion, which is an 11-day period, and that's open statewide. And then a couple other portions that we have. We've got a CWD portion that's a 5-day portion right on the back end of the November portion that we have in our management zone counties. And then last but not least, the alternative methods portion, which a lot of people still refer to as the muzzleloader season. And that's this year, tail end of December into early January. So lots of different opportunities, whether you want to go out specifically target antlerless deer, or whether you want to go to the alternative methods, or if you're a youth hunter, you got a couple different options. So, you think about our season, it's a really long archery season, a lot of opportunity for those folks. But then if you're a firearms hunter as well, lots of different portions to pick and choose based on what time of year you like to hunt and what you like to harvest.
That late season alternative methods portion, Jason, I remember as a kid when MDC announced you could use an atlatl, I think it was at the time. Is that still an option for the alternative methods?
Yeah, you can actually use that during any portion of the deer season.
Oh,
and
great.
So as you would suspect, very few do use it, but the option's there for those that want to.
Very cool. Well, Jason, thanks a lot for coming on the show again. Always good to catch up with you. And we'll make sure to direct folks to the MDC website for those season dates and any regulation questions they may have. Good to see you again, and thanks for being with us on Outdoor Adventures.
Yeah, good to talk to you, Brent.
Jason Isabelle there with Missouri Department of Conservation. I'm Brent Barnett here with Brownfield. Thanks for joining us again on another episode of Outdoor Adventures.